Alright, let's sleep. Pull up the covers, close your eyes. Tonight we're not talking about ghosts, monsters, or fairy tale princes and princesses. I'm going to tell you a true story from history, a hilarious, incredible, and slightly ridiculous tale about a super-powered road trip that took place over 800 years ago. It all starts in 1187, on the other side of the world, in a place called Jerusalem. It was a holy city for 3 religions, but at the time it was held by a bunch of European crusaders who had come from far away. Then, out of nowhere, a massive army of 60,000 Muslims appeared from the desert. Their leader was a man named Saladin, a brilliant, classy, and wise badass. Saladin marched his army from Aleppo, and in July, near a place called Hattin, he met the main army of the king of Jerusalem in a massive battle. He crushed them so hard that they couldn't even find their own horses. He captured the king himself, the head of the Knights Templar, and, most importantly, he took back the holy city of Jerusalem, which had been occupied by the West for 88 long years. The news exploded across Europe like a bomb. The entire Christian world had a collective meltdown. When Pope Urban III heard the terrible news, he got so mad that he was carried straight to a hospital. Then the rumors got even wilder. Some said he dropped dead of rage on the spot, others that he had a heart attack right at his desk. Either way, he was literally pissed to death. That event was like a giant matchstick that went whoosh and set all of Europe on fire with a thirst for revenge. Everyone started furiously preparing for a brand new crusade. The kings and nobles were rubbing their hands together, looking like they were about to pull out their great-granddaddy's broadsword from an old leather suitcase. The all-star lineup, full of villains and heroes. Let's take a look at the super awesome, over-the-top lineup for the Third Crusade. Every name on this list was a legend. First up, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, also known as Red Beard. At the time, the old man was pushing 70, which in the Middle Ages, where life expectancy was around 40, made him not just an ancient relic, but basically a living fossil. But he refused to act his age. Most people retired to play with their grandkids. He got on his tall warhorse and marched east himself. White hair, white beard, and all, he put his armor back on to throw down with the youngsters. Historians think he wanted to imitate the glory of his ancestor Charlemagne. I call him the silver-haired sunset tour group of kings. Second, the King of France, Philip II. He was young, short, but ambitious as a fox. He was so clever that you could almost see the little gears turning in his head. The moment he saw a chance to use a holy mission for political gain, he raised both hands and feet in favor. For him, going east to fight infidels was just a side hustle. The real business was stirring up trouble and weakening his rivals. Third and finally, our number 1 leading man for tonight, King Richard I of England. Oh, this guy was a heavyweight. His nickname was the Lionheart. Legend had it that he once fought a real lion, stuck his bare hand into its mouth, and ripped out its bleeding heart, which he then swallowed raw. Obviously that's medieval clickbait, but it tells you how much his European buddies thought he was an absolute beast. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, from childhood he was either fighting or on his way to a fight, against his father, his brother, the French, the Germans, the Italians. Now he was going to fight Saladin. In 1189, Richard was officially crowned King of England. First order of business. A giant yard sale. He sold the city of London. Seriously, he almost pawned off the whole capital to pay for his army. He sold bishop positions, government titles, and famously announced, "If the price is right, you can take London away on a cart." His motto, "If it can be sold, I'll sell it, even London." If his father Henry II were watching from heaven, he'd be spinning in his coffin so fast he'd drill a hole to China. When the news from the east, that Saladin had taken Jerusalem, finally reached Richard, he threw down his stake, splattering grease all over the table, and roared, "I, Richard, will sell everything I own, right now, and join the crusade." The all-star team was set. 3 huge armies marched toward the east in 3 columns. Fancy entrance, right? Perfect. Surely this unstoppable trio would smash Saladin into next week, no problem. But as the saying goes, the best laid plans go sideways, and disaster often starts with something stupid. The Emperor's Fatal Bath. June 10, 1190. An unnamed little river somewhere in Asia Minor. The June sun over the Anatolian plateau wasn't warm, it was like a dragon's breath. 70-year-old Emperor Frederick Barbarossa had been riding his tall horse all morning, sweaty and dusty, with a helmet that could hold a bowl of soup. Then he saw the river. The breeze felt cool. His eyes lit up. Ah, what lovely water. Halt. Rest time. I'm going for a swim. His guards and knights looked at each other, but who's going to argue with the emperor? So the whole army stopped by the riverbank and watched their aged monarch dismount and, in a move that was totally inappropriate for a man with osteoporosis, splash into the water. Many historians later tried to cover it up, saying he was just watering his horse and slipped. But let me ask you, who takes off their armor to water a horse, then goes, whoops, and falls in? What really happened? One story says he had a heart attack in the water and kicked the bucket instantly. Another says the water was only waist deep, but somehow he choked and sank. The most popular version, the one that appears in many old manuscripts, claims that he was holding a holy relic called the Spear of Longinus, the lance that supposedly pierced Jesus Christ's side. Whoever held it was supposed to be invincible in battle. Suddenly, the spear slipped out of his hand. He lunged to grab it, but his armor was too heavy. He rolled over in the water like a clumsy iron turtle, and never came back up. End result. Before the Third Crusade even reached the main battlefield, one of its 3 titans had drowned. The entire Christian world was thunderstruck. Tens of thousands of German soldiers stood by the river and wept. But after crying, what could they do? Their leader was dead. The army fell apart faster than a cheap tent. They scattered like rabbits. Hard mode from the get-go. King Philip II of France didn't drown, but his sneaky little heart was already scheming. He arrived at the front lines first and started a half-hearted siege against the Muslims at a city called Acre. Weeks passed. The city didn't fall. In his mind, he kept thinking, where's the English fleet? When is that maniac Richard going to show up and take the heat for me? About a month later, June 1191, the Lionheart himself finally landed his flagship, stepped onto the dock, and surveyed the French siege works. The contempt nearly boiled over inside him. What kind of pathetic siege is this? The mighty French army can't even take a bite out of Acre's walls after all this time. But Richard held his tongue, took over command calmly, and sent word back to Cyprus for supplies while he crafted crazy clever tactics. But anyone who's ever been on a long voyage knows, you float in the Mediterranean for weeks, eating salted fish and drinking stale water, sealed up in a stuffy ship like a sardine can, then you add Middle Eastern heat, and boom. Richard fell sick. Scurvy symptoms, high fever, bleeding gums, total body weakness. The army doctor advised him to rest in the rear dock. But this was Richard. He had himself carried to the front lines on a stretcher. When the English soldiers saw their king refusing to die anywhere but on the battlefield, they went completely berserk. They screamed and charged at the walls. Acre fell. The Crusaders flooded into the city like a tidal wave. After the victory, Richard's frustration boiled over. He'd been delayed so long by the stubborn defenders at Acre. He was furious. He ordered the execution of 2,700 Muslim prisoners on the spot, right there in the open. That brutal act might have satisfied his anger, but it planted a deep, undying hatred in the enemy's heart. Philip II was also unhappy. He felt like a big-name supporting actor who flew thousands of miles to fire the first shots, only to have the spotlight stolen completely by the Lionheart. Richard got all the glory, Philip got all the grunt work. Plus, he was getting sick too. So Philip found an excuse, packed his bags, and flew back home to France. And just like that, the Third Crusade officially entered one-on-one mode, Lionheart Richard versus Saladin. From 3 titans down to just 1. Mutual respect, like a reality show. The next few months along the coast of Israel turned into the most entertaining medieval fighting ring in history. The two heavyweights danced around each other, testing and pressuring, but neither could land a killing blow. Instead, in front of the whole world, they performed an epic drama of enemies who respected each other. At one point, Richard's warhorse was struck by a Muslim arrow. The king tumbled off his horse and fell flat on his face in the dirt. Saladin saw this and actually ordered a temporary halt to the battle. He sent 2 purebred Arabian stallions as gifts to Richard, along with a message: "There's no glory in killing a man who can't even stay on his horse. Don't let ignorance ruin a knightly duel." Wasn't this supposed to be a fight to the death? Richard just stared at the horses for a moment. He said nothing. He got on one of them, raised his sword again, and pointed it at the enemy. But from that moment on, a strange sense of admiration grew in his heart. Later, Richard fell seriously ill again, high fever, too weak to lift a sword. Saladin heard about it and sent him chilled snow water, fresh fruit, and his own personal oriental physician. He also sent a message: "Never mind our agreement. Get well first, then we'll fight." That's basically the medieval version of, "I'll fatten you up before I beat you." If this were a live stream today, the chat would be filled with, "Just kiss already." Saladin even proposed a truly game-changing peace deal: marry his own brother to Richard's sister, unite the 2 families, and share Jerusalem peacefully. But Richard seemed to have reservations, and the deal never closed. Even so, Saladin didn't get angry. They continued to fight politely and cleverly against each other. This weird, frenemy relationship lasted all the way to the Battle of Jaffa in 1192. Saladin gathered his best troops to besiege the port city of Jaffa, trying to cut off Richard's supply line by sea. The Crusaders were caught off guard and lost the outer defenses. Richard found himself trapped in a shaky church with just a few dozen knights. Any normal commander would have been finished. But Saladin looked at the smoke-filled church steps and the unmoving figure standing there. He was silent. Then he waved his hand, and for the umpteenth time, ordered his army to pull back. The endgame for 2 badasses. The Third Crusade never got a big, cinematic final showdown. For every step Richard advanced, Saladin took a step back. When Richard tried to march on Jerusalem, Saladin poisoned every well so there wasn't a drop of water to be found. Crusader horses fell dead. Soldiers starved. The wounded filled every tent. In September 1192, the talks at Jaffa finally finished. Both sides signed the Treaty of Jaffa. Saladin allowed unarmed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem freely. The Crusaders kept all the coastal territories they'd retaken. Trade routes reopened. It wasn't the glorious reconquest of Jerusalem that Europe had dreamed of, but given the 3 years of bloody fighting and tens of thousands of dead buried in the desert sand, it was the best peace they could make. Before Richard left, he stood on a high lookout outside Acre, took one last look at the endless yellow sand of the Middle East, sheathed his sword, and boarded his ship without looking back. He had no idea that the real drama was only just beginning. King Lockpicker, the dignity of silver handcuffs. In late 1192, disguised as a merchant, Richard snuck onto a rickety ship heading home. His plan was to cross through French territories and slip over the Alps, avoiding all the enemies who wanted his head on a pike. Half of Europe's royalty wanted him dead or captured. King Philip II of France already hated his guts. The new Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, wanted to make an example of him. But fate led him right into the hands of Leopold V, Duke of Austria. This duke had been publicly humiliated by Richard at Acre when Richard had his banners thrown into the mud. Leopold never forgot. One day, a priest in a tavern mentioned a man nearby with a thick English accent who claimed to be a merchant. Leopold grabbed his men, stormed in, and captured Richard. With swords at his throat, Richard figured he was dead either way. But dying in this dump would be such a waste. So he put on a show. He looked Leopold in the eye and declared, with all seriousness, that he was the King of England, and he could not be paraded around in common iron shackles. That would be too shameful. Only silver chains were worthy of his royal dignity. Has anyone ever heard of a prisoner demanding premium cuffs? But Leopold blinked, thought for a second, and agreed. He had a pair of pure silver manacles and leg irons made and locked them onto Richard. The shiny silver chains actually looked kind of nice. There sat the King of England, locked up in a cold, dreary castle, wearing fancy silver jewelry he never asked for. Looking out the iron window, he probably wondered if selling London had been such a great idea. The epic ransom and a sad hero. When news of Richard's capture reached England, the country exploded. His 73-year-old mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, stepped up. No begging, no pleading, just business, we're getting him back. The old lady took charge of the royal court and launched a nationwide fundraiser. London even issued a ransom tax, seizing 1/7 of all movable property from every parish. Even the Knights Templar were forced to chip in. Henry VI demanded 150,000 silver marks. In today's money, that's like several $billion. Eleanor and her supporters scraped together 100,000 marks and piled chests of gold and silver on the emperor's dinner table. But paying wasn't enough. Richard had to kneel before Henry VI, hand over his crown, and acknowledge himself as a vassal of the Holy Roman Empire. For a man who had faced down Saladin on the battlefield and never blinked, this was the most humiliating moment of his life. But he knelt. He reached out. He handed over everything. In 1194, King Richard I finally set foot on his English homeland after 5 long years. The last arrow. When Richard got home, he found that his scheming little brother, John, had been up to no good and had even tried to steal the throne. Another man might have started a family bloodbath. But Richard looked at John's red-faced embarrassment and probably remembered the days when they practiced swordplay as kids. Instead of killing his brother, he forgave him. The brothers made a shaky peace, barely holding the Plantagenet dynasty together. But peace didn't last long. In 1199, in a small castle in southern France, a minor lord rebelled, calling himself the soldier of God, and refusing to submit. The Lionheart's rage erupted like a volcano. Richard charged over like a madman and surrounded the castle. On the eve of the final assault, he couldn't resist the urge to scout the defenses himself. He took a few attendants and rode around the moat in the moonlight, holding a map in one hand and a torch in the other. His shining, ornate armor was like a lighthouse in the dark. It might as well have had a neon sign saying, "Shoot me." Sure enough, twang. A poisoned crossbow bolt flew from the castle wall and struck him in the left shoulder. The arrowhead shattered inside the bone. No one could pull it out. Richard gritted his teeth and rode back to his tent. The field surgeon tried to dig out the fragments with tweezers, but bits of rusty metal remained, and the wound turned septic. By the third day, he was burning with fever. By the seventh, he could barely turn over. They heated gold instruments red hot and pressed them to his skin to try to burn away the rotten flesh. But it was too late. On the 10th night, the tent flap opened, and low sobs drifted out. The Lionheart, King Richard I of England, the supreme commander of the entire crusade, just 42 years old, died from a chain of stupid bad luck, one patrol, one stray arrow, one case of lockjaw. Epilogue, legends never die. And that's the whole story of the Third Crusade. 3 titans set out in glory, and what a ridiculous ending. A 70-year-old emperor drowned in a river he decided to swim in. The King of France sneaked off early to grab power at home. The King of England, unbeatable on the battlefield, respected even by Saladin, was killed by a random nobody's lucky shot, dying on the eve of a minor siege. The real kicker. When Saladin learned that his old enemy had died in such an undignified, stupid way, he was silent for a long, long time. They say he just stared into space. He didn't laugh. He didn't cheer. A year later, he too was gone, taken by a fever. The 2 legendary warriors seem to have agreed, one after the other, to walk off the stage of history together. Now, back to your cozy bed. Think about it, the 70-year-old emperor went for a refreshing dip in a strange river and was gone. The battle-hardened Lionheart couldn't sleep one night, rode up to an enemy wall with a flaming torch, and handed himself to a crossbowman. When you really look closely at medieval epics, they're often full of these absurd, hilarious, dark little jokes. Alright. The story is done. Good night. May there be no lion roaring outside your window, no enemy raid, and no silver handcuffs. Sleep well.